We arrived in Lhasa, Tibet by plane. The terrain was rather dry, and when we exited the plane, we realized the air was very thin, 12,000 feet thin. One of our traveling companions had trouble walking from the plane into the terminal. Jody had altitude sickness later and needed a few minutes of oxygen. By the next day, all was fine, but we could tell to take it slowly. Lhasa was taken over by the Chinese in the late 50s. The Chinese don't care for Buddhism, as noticed by the armed troops marching around the most important temple. The Chinese policy in Tibet seems to be flood the area with Chinese and the Tibetans will become the minority. Blocks and blocks and blocks of apartment houses were built and remain empty till the businesses and workers from China inundate the area. We saw lots of road and bridge construction, mostly brand new cars, and lots of electric motor scooters. The scooters would drive on the sidewalk and silently sneak up on you. We were continually looking over our shoulders. Much of Lhasa smelled of juniper incense. On the rare occasion there was no incense smell, urine odor permeated the air. It was very dusty and many Tibetans wore face masks. The temperatures were in the 60s, and most days we wore light summer clothing. We had no precipitation while we were there. Food was basically Chinese with a little yak, chicken, beef, and some fish added. We didn't care for the butter tea. We found the local people to be very pleasant and helpful. We didn't see beggars or hucksters selling trinkets like we did in Nepal. Overall, Tibet's a poor place, being supported by the Chinese in such a big way that the traditional way of life may be rare in 5 to 10 years. We traveled over 30 hours to get to Beijing, where we needed to get a permit to get into Tibet, so we were there only less than 24 hours. It was raining when we got to Beijing, but we went out on a tour on a little rickshaw to a Hutong area. It's a residential area where they have to share community bathrooms, and we didn't go in and see any of them.
Don't. Oh, you just gotta take it.
小费同一个啊，在山上口袋里了。20。好。
Beep beep. Beep beep.
The alleyway was very narrow, and we often had to share it with lots of vehicles along the way. We had lunch at a private residence, and to say the least, we had a very delicious Chinese meal. We then walked to a place where we had a tea ceremony, which was very interesting.
Very good accent. Today I'm very glad to show you the Chinese traditional tea ceremony. As we know, China is a homeland of tea. So in China, we have more than 3,000 different kinds of teas. But according to the different process of making, it can be divided into 6 bigger groups. So that one teapot, we better make one type of tea. After 1 or 2 years, no need buying tea anymore. Just put hot water without tea. Yeah, get the same tea flavor. Save the money. Yes. 1 pot teapot for one tea. Before making tea water, I'd like to use a hot water warm the teapot. Both the inside and outside get the same temperature, so later the tea flavor can come out quickly. For warming the teapot, also for cleaning the teapot. And when we make a ginseng oolong tea at home for one person, we better put 1 teaspoon, about 2 grams. That's enough for one person drinking one day. Because for the same tea leaves, you can keep adding water again and again for 3.
Then went to the summer palace of the last Empress of China and eventually ended up for another wonderful Chinese dinner. Early the next morning, we took a 4.5-hour flight from Beijing to Lhasa, Tibet, on the north side of the Himalayas. We had a tour of the Dalai Lama's summer palace. Many motorbikes had hand and foot coverings made of cloth in many, many different designs. We went to a traditional Tibetan medicine hospital. They used herbs and pressures to help the patient. It was sort of supplemental to our regular medicine. We then went to the temple square where they were burning incense, and the people were prostrating themselves to honor the religion. We weren't allowed to take many pictures inside, and we came across a monk who has been there since the 50s. For some reason, the Chinese let him there. Traditional Chinese toilet where you squat, and some dried frogs. We noticed these visitors at one of the sites. Noticed the little boy's pants. Most meats and vegetables were out in the open air. And a lot of these small shops sold just certain types of things, like these little kids' outfits. We then drove about an hour outside the city to visit a nunnery, and here is a nun. It looks very similar to the monks. The village seemed to be very self-sufficient. When we got to the house where we were going to have breakfast, Jody asked the mother if she could hold her son, and she was fine with it. Little boy seemed fine with it, but then our guide, Nima, tried to get in on the action, and the little boy wasn't having it. Inside the house, we were served potatoes and croissants, and some butter tea, which we didn't care for, and some sweet tea. This is their kitchen, and every family reserves one room for a sacred place. They'll have pictures of monks, butter lamps, and other artifacts. This is their family. And yak dung drying, which they use for cooking. These prayer wheels get spun clockwise to send the prayers to heaven. The village was kind of sparse on the outside, and we noticed a lot of litter. There were some yaks walking around, and it looked like a little campground. We ate there, and it was pleasant enough. We were told all the yaks belonged to somebody. Often they had a collar on, and they were just roaming wild. Here's a picture of the intrepid travelers aging from 82 to the mid-60s. We then went to a Tonga art display where they were painting traditional Buddhist paintings. Often they would sketch it out on the canvas and then take up to 18 months to finish the project. It was very tedious. This little boy was kicking a plastic soda bottle back and forth with one of our travelers. We then walked about a quarter mile uphill to a monastery where the monks were debating. Jody's supper that night, and then on to the Potala Palace, which was the main administrative area when the Dalai Lama was there. There was quite a gain in altitude to get to the top. Scenic Lhasa from on top of the Potala Palace. And we ended our tour with a traditional Tibetan dance.